and welcome to this episode of Trader Talk TV. I'm Lindsay Roundtree. I'm joined today by Andrew Serby, who is EVP of Marketing at Zephyr. Hello, Andrew.
Hello, Lindsay. Great to be here. I was going to say great to have you, but great to be here.
Great to have you here. And today you're talking about what Zephyr's bread and butter is, which is brand suitability in video. So before we kind of go into how Zephyr manages that for brands, it's great to have an understanding of I guess, what Zephyr is and does, and then also an understanding of brand suitability and brand safety as it's evolved from have been massive topics over the years for marketers. So it'd be interesting to kind of have a brief overview of kind of the journey that's gone on to where we are now.
Yeah, so there's definitely a lot that's gone on in brand safety and brand suitability in the world. So a bit about Zephyr. We're a data and technology company. We focus on understanding very complex media for brands who are sensitive about their content adjacency. So it's always been part of media, right? Brands have cared about where their ad placements show. It's happened on TV, on radio, but the delivery mechanisms have totally changed. Where consumers are spending time has totally changed. More and more of that time is spent on platforms, and the platforms are scaled in nature, which makes them incredible for users and incredible media platforms, but they are very challenging from an advertiser perspective because the media looks so different than traditional premium publisher content that they're used to from the history of media. And because of that, they're required a lot different tooling and different technology to actually make brands comfortable and confident that when they're spending on a UGC platform or a new environment, that they're aligned with content that is safe and suitable for their brand. So that's where Zephyr comes in. We build, and we'll walk through how this happens, pretty robust systems to understand video so that we can actually precisely understand what video is about. And then brands can either measure their brand safety and suitability or their context from using our tools, or they can use it for targeting to make sure that they're targeting the content that speaks best for their brand. So it's really either way the brand wants to work with us. Content adjacency is the through line, but increasingly brand suitability has been the thing that brands really are demanding because it's so nuanced now. And every brand has their own sort of risk tolerance, and they come to us to make sure that they're applying those risk tolerances to whatever massive platform buy that they have.
It's fascinating, really, because we talk about video and we talk about video in many different contexts, right? There are so many different platforms available. For a brand, it must be quite daunting knowing where to start and how can I even possibly understand what is suitable and what is safe for my brand and where can it appear, knowing that I'm targeting the right people, I'm showing against the right content. So this must be a very, very interesting role that Zephyr plays in this entire journey for a marketer.
Yeah, it's definitely interesting. So I would say that's part of the journey in the last several years, right? It's been the evolution of, okay, I know some content is really bad for my brand. This is all brand unsafe content. Everything that happened in 2017. What's really emerged over the last several years is the idea of defining brand suitability. Because it's so subjective, it becomes really easy to obfuscate responsibility when there's no clear right or wrong answer. And we've been really leaning on the GARM industry framework because we think that creating a common taxonomy and the work that actually making the idea of brand suitability much more objective. So brand suitability, of course, every brand's going to have their own risk tolerance, not even sub-brands within a large CPG, right? There are going to be some brands that are targeting an 18 to 24-year-old, some brands targeting a 35 to 54-year-old. Some of them gaming is okay, some of them it's not. In all cases, there's going to be unique tolerances, but at least having an architecture to start the conversation from the same spot. The IAB Tech Lab has done a great job of adopting this as well and putting this into their taxonomy. So we think that the brand suitability framework that GARM has kind of put out into the marketplace has really done a huge effort for a lot of the buy side to understand what vendors are actually solving for brand suitability and who's not. So for us, we think this is a massive opportunity. But it's also a huge technical challenge to make sure that you're accurately gathering information and intelligence based off of these GARM categories.
Yeah, and that's what I think is interesting because as we just talked about, there's a massive undertaking. A video, videos are not all things being equal. They're not exactly the same things, are they? So in display, you could argue for the most part, an ad is an ad, but a video is not the case when you're looking at all different platforms. So how do you unpick what suitability looks like in the different platforms?
Yeah, well, so there's a lot of data that goes on in every video, right? So there's a lot of different signals, and because of that, there's a lot of noise. And the challenge, obviously, from a data science and machine learning standpoint is how do you get the signal from the noise? And you look at YouTube, right? This is just one massive platform. But even in itself, you look at one video, you have the video, you have the duration, you have the title, you have the publisher date, you have the channel, you have the description, you have the comments, you have the related videos, you have the likes and dislikes. There's so much that goes on inside of a YouTube video that just looking at one of these signals in a vacuum is really challenging to get a signal from. And what we find traditionally is the easiest signal is to just look at the title and look at the words and the metadata, right? Because that's how people typically think about content, especially in the open web. What we found for YouTube, that's so hard to do at scale and accurately get brand suitability because there's so many false positives. There's much more limited metadata. The words that UGC creators are putting up on their content is so much different than what a publisher would write when they're writing for SEO. It just becomes a really hard signal, especially at the scale of a platform like YouTube with 500 hours of content uploaded every minute. It's just too hard to manage all these different components. But it requires deep technology to actually take all these into account and start to build enough training data signals to actually understand what are the good signals, what are the bad signals. And what we found is just looking at this isn't enough. We really need human cognition to be part of this, because without human cognition, there's just too many opportunities for false positives and false negatives in understanding the content because it's so diverse.
Interesting. So the role of human cognition is to make is to sense check, sanity check, or is it another layer on top of where the AI element comes into it? How do the two work together?
Yeah, so it's pre and post. So it's core to everything that we believe is important for the industry. It's about building a sophisticated process where people know what their role is. And we can't be overly ambitious, right? We have to make sure that people understand what the job is. So what we do, we have a team of moderators. The moderators look at all the different types of content that exists on YouTube and what brands want to be around. So that's everything from sports content to food and cooking content to health and wellness content. It also is about all the GARM categories, right? So adult and explicit sexual content, arms and ammunition. And what they do is they create example videos that match those definitions, right? So they say, okay, here are some videos that map to sports. Here are some videos that map to adult and explicit sexual content. And what they do is they write really clear instructions so that the crowd can understand them. And what that looks like in this process, right? So you have a moderator team that's coming up with all these definitions. We're integrated into a crowdsourced platform. So we have scaled crowdsourced review. And what happens from that is we start to do content scoring, right? So every single video is scored based off of all the different types of content it is. So whether that's what language it's in, the type of content it is, the brand safety according to GARM, the brand suitability, the IAB taxonomy. We score every single one of these videos. And what happens is a feedback loop where the results come back to the humans. They verify, okay, this is something that's new, there's drift, or this is something that's accurate. And we score literally every single one of the videos that we see on YouTube every single day. And then we now do that across multiple platforms.
Wow. So what does that mean from a brand perspective in terms of, so you are going through all of this and you are you are analyzing tons and tons of data. You've got the AI recognition, you've got the human recognition going on. What then does a brand understand from what you're sharing with them, or what does the brand see?
Yeah, so I'll walk you through the demo of the product too, because I think it's super helpful. Basically, what we've tried to do over the last several years, take this kind of back-end data science model and put it into a front end that makes it really simple for an advertiser. But from an advertiser's perspective, there are kind of two applications. So one is they want to target specific types of content environments that they know speak well for their audience and their brand. But it's kind of opaque when they just do it through a platform, or if they do it through another third party. They actually want to see the videos. They want to touch it. They want to have a more visceral understanding. The second piece is if they're just running media, they want to understand, what was my risk tolerance? Like, how did the brand advertising match up to my different GARM settings? And what they can do, they can go into our platform and really understand it. So I'll walk you through a little bit of what it looks like. So inside of and I made one for ExchangeWire.
Love it. Brilliant.
I figured that you guys would be a little bit more risk tolerant than the average brand that we work with. Just listening to some of the podcasts.
You are not wrong.
So what we end up doing is we created on the back end all this kind of data science to understand all these content. And on the front end, a brand can go in and they can say, okay, what's my risk tolerance? what they can actually do is see example videos of what these different risk tolerances mean on YouTube, right? So they can say, what does low risk content mean? What does medium risk content mean? What does high risk content mean? And what they can do is they can go in and actually, based off of the GARM settings, create their risk tolerance for each one of these categories. So they can go in, they can edit the profile. They say, you know what, I actually have a low risk tolerance. They can change it so that only videos that are low risk for the category would enter a campaign. They could do that across each one of their different categories. And the idea here is they're able to actually look and touch and see what the content would be to be more comfortable with maybe expanding risk and adding more scale to their campaign. And two, having one sort of single point of contact for all of their scaled walled garden activations. So they can go through this, activate it. And then there's additional categories that GARM doesn't carry, right? But they're important, different distinctions for advertisers. So alcohol content, arms and ammunition content, children's entertainment content, a lot of the more sensitive areas, brands could go in on the front end and say, I just want to exclude this altogether. So it's a very powerful tool to actually see the content in advance. You can save the profile. So if you're an exchange wire advertiser, you will make sure that this is your risk profile going forward. And what that allows you to do is really plan going forward an advertising campaign with your brand suitability mapped in. So your profile set, and now you can start building a campaign. So let's say you want to be around fashion content because it's super hot right now. Exchange wire, huge audience with the fashion crowd, a very fashionable audience. And what you do is you are able to go through and see on a sliding scale relevance and scale. And you're able to see in real time, based off of your suitability profile, these are the videos that would enter a campaign pre-flight. And every single video, you can see a score. And what this score is the human review likelihood that this video maps back to fashion. So every single thing that we do from the system on the advertiser perspective is totally transparent. You can click in every single one of the videos and you can see exactly how we rate videos, because we think that's one of the things that's really missing in the industry. It's this idea of transparency of the data science. Our head of data science will always say, we'll never be perfect. It's impossible to be perfect, especially in video, because videos could be about so many different things. But at least we want to provide that data out to our customers so they can tell us feedback and really start to understand the nuances of video that are so different from the rest of the open web.
And that's really interesting and really smart, because we all know that marketers love control, or at least the illusion of control. So, and the key term you mentioned a couple of times there is transparency. And actually, for marketers to be able to go and see exactly what kind of content you're talking about when you say against a certain category, we're not just, it's not a black box solution, right? And nobody wants a black box, particularly when it comes to things like brand safety and brand suitability. Black boxes are the last thing you want to be operating with, because you want to be able to understand, okay, it is so important for me, where is my brand going to be seen and by whom, and actually just be able to show the content in such an easy way is a very interesting point. And it all ties back to the importance of transparency. Very interesting.
Yeah, and to that point, we also want to look at it in terms of brand suitability, right? So that was a lot of the positive content. But on the back end, I think this is really interesting and fascinating, because what you can actually start to see is to the idea of transparency. We rate every video. So you can see here some of the concepts we looked at. This is all based off of customer demands. So let's look at something like weapons, right? Or weapons in a vacuum is really challenging. So what we can actually do is we start to drill down into different scores around what's the probability of video in a prediction model is about weapons, right? And we can see here on a sliding scale, the confidence level. So this is videos that are 75% confident that they're about weapons. And you can click in and you can actually see the results, right? And you can see the relevance score, you can see the forecasted views, and the content is pretty clearly about weapons, right? It's pretty obvious that this is all weapons related content. So this is how we constantly are training and seeing in the back end to make sure that we're accurately capturing all these different concepts. And we've put a score on everything, right? So we don't want to make it a black and white yes or no. It's too much drift that happens on the platform. This is something we're doing at scale across every single one of the GARM categories, as well as the IAB taxonomy, so that it's really clear to our customers in terms of, one, what's the potential damage in terms of forecasted views against this content? And two, it's what does this content look like, so we can train our systems and train our human reviewers to look for more content like this to further train the system. So you can click in, you can actually see, you can see the forecasted views, you can see the titles. It's totally transparent, and all of our advertisers have access to all of this data. To your point, it's questionable how much data anyone actually needs, but our point is let's give them everything, see how they react to it, because it's been so hard to find real answers in brand suitability and brand safety for so long. We wanted to make the system entirely transparent.
And you talked about again transparency and look and being able to look into the detail of any given video or any given category. Who then in a marketer or in an agency, kind of on the buying side, who is the person that you are most closely working with? Who is the one going in and looking into these in detail? I can't see kind of I guess a really senior marketeer being the person going and doing that, although if they love data and they love looking at things, and they probably do. But who are the kind of your main target audiences for brand suitability conversations in video?
Yeah, so that's a great question. So it really runs the gamut. So we're able to have conversations with anyone from a trader who is buying on DV360, Google Ads, and social platforms, all the way up to a CMO who's concerned about their brand image and making sure that they're protected in front of the right type of content environment. And usually, and I'll go in full screen here, this is the kind of information that really starts to be powerful here. So what ends up happening is there's a lot of switching costs, right, in brand safety and suitability. It's a very sticky business. So once brands have a trusted provider, they tend to use that provider for a long time, unless there's a problem, right? So what we try to figure out with them and work with them is, we have all this backend technology. How do we actually make it useful for you? Like, how is it going to improve your life if you're a CMO, if you're a head of marketing? How is it going to improve your life if you're a trader, if you're a media manager? And what we start to do is we start to show them the differences in terms of the accuracy and the precision. And that starts to get like a little light bulb moment. You're like, okay, I'm actually going to get a much more accurate view of context and brand suitability if I use the powerful technology that Zephyr is running. So here are two examples, which I think they're funny examples, but they also like speak to the larger challenge that exists, because this happens literally all day, every day. And it's across both context and safety and suitability. So one of the other providers in the space, it's very common, and most companies in the space use semantic technology, right? So they use natural language processing. They look at the words on the page, those words create a signal for training data to make a determination about what something's about. This works amazingly on the open web when there's tons of text and there's tons of words in the page, and there's a lot of signals, right? In video, doesn't work nearly as well. It's way more challenging because there's way less words, and the words often have nothing to do with the video itself. So here's an example of us. One of the main challenges that exists on YouTube is so much children's entertainment content. It's a major area of what advertisers consider waste. And what happens is we put this video through that system, and it was who took the donuts, baby panda detective, ice cream hamburgers, which is a kid's video. I don't have any kids, but I feel bad for parents who have to watch this with their kids, or if they're passing it off to their
Likewise.
kids. It is a huge trend. These get hundreds of millions of views, right? So the algorithm's always pushing towards it. We ran this through the system. This was categorized as dessert and baking and fast food video. Clearly, the reason is ice cream and hamburgers and donuts in the metadata. And the advertiser is actually trying to avoid or be smart about their content alignment around their audience. This is the type of thing they ask us to avoid, but they don't know they're actually targeting it, because the signals are all saying this is a dessert and baking and fast food video. We ran this through our system, 96% likelihood to be kids content, only 5% likelihood to be food grade. The flip side of this is all around safety and suitability. And you always talk about the false positives, right? Of like, you accidentally get a bad video in, but we actually see a lot of missed reach from an advertiser perspective, because they're blocking so much good content, which really hurts publishers, and it really hurts the advertiser overall reach goal, which makes brand safety kind of have a bad name a little bit, right? It's like, oh, I got to balance the safety with the scale of my campaign. And the reason for that is a lot of the tooling is just super inadequate. So here's an example of a video that was labeled as unsafe in a verification campaign that we ran from another brand. It was like, oh, take a look at our verification. It was a cooking video. The word semi-naked cake was in there. It's pretty obvious for us once you start seeing some of the verification taxonomies why this was labeled unsafe for adult and explicit sexual content. And this is a video that would be recommended to be blocked, right? It hurts the publisher, hurts the advertiser, because this is much more food-centric than the kids video to the left. But because the signals itself, the advertiser is missing so much of this content. So we're seeing this at a pretty large scale. in terms of advertisers, one, getting it wrong in terms of over blocking good content, and two, actually missing the stuff they want to block. And because of that, we're getting a lot of interesting conversations with senior level marketers, as well as the brand safety leads at a lot of the holding companies, who are doing a really good job of vetting the technology and understanding what are the differences between the technology and what are the benefits to my customers. And I think the idea of missed reach is one of the ones that I think from a brand suitability perspective, we're getting a lot more traction from a day-to-day advertiser perspective.
Yeah, the missed reach one's an interesting one, because I was going to ask you, which you basically kind of answered it, was outside of kind of these obvious sort of, I guess, jokey scenarios where, you know, a kid's video is miscategorized as baking, and a perfectly innocent baking video is miscategorized as being pornographic or explicit. There's a lot of legacy in terms of practices when it comes to block lists, suppression lists, and brand safety and brand suitability in general. How do you? There's still a lot of work to be done. Obviously, you're seeing some great results with the clients you work with. There's still a lot of work to be done with a lot of buyers that still rely on block lists, because they give that element of control like we talked about earlier, and they want to be able to see everything they're doing and say, okay, I know I can block that. And many marketers just go, I want to make sure that word's blocked. How do you have that meaningful conversation with them? Which again, you have kind of answered, but it must be a tough conversation to have for many of these marketers that are so used to doing things a certain way and going, we've got technology that can control this for you. You haven't got to use a spreadsheet anymore. You can use technology, and they go, I'm not sure if I'm ready for that yet. Are you struggling sometimes with some of those more legacy marketers?
Yeah, so it's definitely an education challenge. It requires, I think what we've seen and what I've seen personally is marketers want to do the right thing. It's the intention for them to move beyond it. There's also 20 different companies they talk to a month that are pitching them some new variation of the same thing. And it becomes really noisy in the marketplace, right? So everyone has their own buzzword name of it. They don't call it keywords, they call it semantics or ontology. It's all word related efforts. So it's really confusing, right? So we don't want to make anyone feel bad about it. What we do actually is we want to just make it easy to see the data. So we do diagnostics, and we say, just give us your block list. We'll do an analysis for you. We'll tell you what percentage of your content that you're blocking is low risk, medium risk, and high risk. And from that, you'll be able to just do it as you wish, and make a decision about whether or not that block list is still useful. So that's actually been a really good approach. We've seen a lot of brands lean into that. I think it's going to be a journey. Our hope is that the GARM framework can really replace the need for a lot of the use of keywords for block lists. Like, I still think keywords are going to have a huge place in media, right? It's amazing for search. It's amazing for a lot of the specific types of targeting. It's just not a good tool for brand safety and suitability because it's just so broad and blunt. A lot of unintended biases are also exposed in these that brands are really trying to move away from. It's just a little bit of a process. But this is an example of one of those diagnostics, which I think is really interesting. So what we do is we get a block list from a brand, right? They have some sort of master block list that they send to us. It's a list of anywhere from 500 to 5,000 words. It depends on the brand. And sometimes these have been built over years, right? You'll see things you didn't even remember was a problem. It'll be like Las Vegas on there, right? And that was from the Las Vegas shooting a couple of years ago, right? So they're really hard to maintain. It's not really, they don't really keep up with the date. But what we do is we just take a subset of it. And it's not meant to make anyone feel bad. What we do is we run it through our system and we say, okay, how much of the content every single day on YouTube that is low risk has words in the metadata that map back to this? Because these are the types of videos you'd be blocking every single day. So you see things like girls, threat, naked, millions and millions of views every single day against low risk content. And you see what the content is, right? So the word gang is excluded. Of course, in a vacuum, the word gang is terrible. But if you actually see what the content is on YouTube, it's Riverdale trailers saying the gang's all back together, and the brands is blocking that. Or the word naked, it's the naked metadata in the like a beauty video is being blocked. So when brands start to actually see it, I think that's the only way to move towards this idea of moving beyond keyword block lists, is actually giving brands answers and not just writing white papers about it in some senses. You have to actually show them, here's the impact, here's what your brand is missing out on, and here are some alternatives. And right now, I think we definitely don't believe we can do this alone as a company. We have we think this is a larger industry issue. We need to really raise the education on it. But from my perspective, it is one of the biggest challenges. And until there's more solutions out there that allow brands to actually move away from keywords outside of just Zephyr, they still will remain pervasive in the industry.
Yeah, it's fascinating, and this is obviously a really pervasive issue at the moment, a very timely issue with COVID, with the pandemic. And you mentioned earlier about hurting publishers, and often actually the way to make marketers understand it is to show them examples of how by blocking these keywords you are hurting publishers, and you're trying to build better relationships with publishers, and you need to be able to sort of have trust in the process somehow in doing that, right, to kind of give publishers more faith in the content that they are able to produce for you. And the COVID aspect of this is fascinating in terms of, you look at these keywords here, and out of context some of them are odd choices, but as you say, many block lists have been built up over many years, and you can't even remember why you added a keyword in the first place.
Yeah.
But when I was a buyer as well, I was doing exactly the same thing. I'd look back at some of the block lists and go, what on earth was that even for? That makes no sense whatsoever. But also it's out of context, and the context is the big thing here. A lot of the premium news publishers, I remember, video and text publishers, it was a legitimate, interesting story about COVID. It wasn't anything about death or anything like that. It was about, something very, very generic. But every single buyer pretty much had blocked the word COVID or anything related to COVID for at least a year, and it massively impacted publishers. So this feels like, you talk about it being, early stages, a lot of conversation needs to happen, and it's an industry-wide effort that needs to happen. That feels like a great example of things are better now because the industry spoke up and said, we need to stop doing this.
Yeah, no, you're exactly right. And I think the more publishers can speak up, marketers want to support good publishers, right? And it's something that's really important. And for us, we welcome more of those conversations. I think COVID was a good ignition for a lot of the conversation. What I hope happens is that doesn't become the only example, because these are happening literally every day across tons of different news stories all the time. We just partnered with NewsGuard, who I think is doing a really good job in terms of being an expert in news and making sure that they have an actual human curation team and judging news content, so that brands who are concerned about supporting quality journalism, but also avoiding some of the more sensitive misinformation that's pervasive out there in the marketplace, they have solution for it. So I think there are a number of tools at brands' disposal now to make sure that they're supporting quality journalism, supporting quality publishers. And I think it would be a massive win for everyone if a subset of advertisers every year start to slowly move towards that future.
So, I mean, that's all really interesting. And one thing I wanted to ask you in terms of, helping advertisers understand what the process is, better understand things outside of block lists and context. Another thing I want to talk to you about is kind of if you're seeing a change in the kind of marketers that you're working with that are investing in the video space that maybe weren't before. And the context behind that is digital transformation. Over the past 18 months, it's been a massively talked about topic, and marketers have actually transformed digitally more than they ever believed they could do. I think it was Sir Martin Sorrell that said that COVID's been the best chief digital officer that any company could ever have asked for, because it's compelled people to promote themselves digitally in other ways. Have you seen that's changed people's approach to channel selection, and are you seeing more video advertisers come up that you get to have a conversation with?
Yeah, no, I think it's definitely accelerated. Our business has really seen actually a massive tailwind from a lot of the conversation and changes that are happening. I think it's a combination of factors. I think one of the major ones for us is a lot of the more traditional television and linear-based advertisers have fully made the jump over to video platforms. And that was talked about a lot for a long time. The audience has been there, but a lot of the tools and the investment and the way just the teams were set up didn't allow them to fully transition a lot of that scale. And TV is still big, right? It's still a large player and still gets massive investment, but more and more of the shift is happening. And you could feel it now for the first time beyond just headlines. You can start to really feel a lot of those tailwinds. So that's happening. The other thing that I think is fascinating is there are a lot more video choices than before. Publishers have gotten really good with video, but I think the emergence of TikTok in the last 18 months as this massively scaled new exciting platform has really kind of reinvigorated a lot of the conversations around social video and video in general, because it's became such a cultural phenomenon, and there aren't that many advertising supported options for video, which is kind of interesting, because we talk so much about video and eyeballs going to video, but so much of it is SVOD. The AVOD
Yeah.
opportunity in terms of actual scale is pretty, it's been pretty narrow, right? There's YouTube, which is the biggest CTV platform in the world, which I don't think they get enough credit for, but it is huge in terms of every way you can watch video, you can watch YouTube. Hulu in the US is massive in terms of like a traditional CTV, OTT kind of play, but TikTok emerging as a new area has really, I think, accelerated also a lot of the interest in video of brands and agencies being really gung ho on getting set up to be able to take advantage of it.
And actually, with TikTok in mind, and how brands are desperate to take advantage of it and desperate to get in front of these new audiences and understand it better, and you could bring gaming videos into that as well. Again, an area that marketers are trying to understand where their audiences are and how they can target them in new and exciting ways. I wanted to ask you kind of what for you, because you mentioned that, you know, the brand suitability is a massive conversation and a growing conversation. And I think that TikTok and similar are fueling that conversation further with brands trying to get involved. What for you are the important next steps in brand suitability in video, and what are you guys working towards, and what else do you want to see happen from an industry perspective?
Yeah, so for us, we want to make sure that global brands have the same standards, and we want to make sure that everyone, whether you're in London, whether you're in the US, if you're in Latin America, if you're a global brand, you don't have these massively different brand suitability strategies by market, right? You want to have a concise, consolidated approach. So our one hope is that more brands adopt this kind of global alliance of responsible media framework as a starting point, so that we could all start from a common language. That'll just allow us to move much faster. So we can start from the same place. We'll know each other's risk tolerances, and it doesn't become this endless taxonomy where every market has their own sort of unique spin on things. Obviously, there's going to be nuances, but we think the common language, really important, a really good place to start. I think the second piece of it, from our perspective, is really leaning in and understanding the technology behind brand suitability and the different channels that are available, right? So making sure that your open web brand suitability solutions work for the open web, auditing them, making sure that they're being precise, understanding the impact on publishers, really kind of taking a look at some of the key questions. I think more RFIs and more detailed looks into how the verification vendors are looking at brand suitability, I think would be really important. I don't think it's good enough for a set it and forget it kind of approach. I think there needs to be much more innovation in the space. Then the third piece from a brand suitability perspective, and just video in general, I think it requires a totally different tool set. I think using the traditional tool sets that we all know don't work, and we talk about it all the time in terms of keywords or just looking at specific publishers and tiny PMPs, they just don't work for the needs of how marketers think about scaled platforms, right? There's just too much content. You don't want to constrain scale, but you also want to make sure you're accurately in brand suitability. So making sure that the video space is really leaning in and innovating on new solutions that work for video, because I think the video platforms are just entirely different beasts from the traditional internet, and they require entirely different tools.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting point. And I think that also as brands are looking to have more environmental and corporate social governance targets, and also targets in terms of how they work with diverse owned businesses and those kinds of things, actually it will throw up new challenges for how they target audiences and how they buy from those different types of publishers. And this is where brand suitability, particularly in the video space where a lot of these places exist, is going to be really, really important, it seems.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think there's a massive effort from CMOs, right, and corporations largely, right, to be socially responsible and making sure that it's supporting really the types of content that are responsible for them. I think there's a huge opportunity to translate that into everyday media buys, but that requires a lot of the tooling that we are talking about today. But I do think that the gap is narrowing between what you hear in a CMO panel and what a trader is able to do on a campaign. And I think the smaller we can make that gap, the better it is for the entire industry.
Yeah, absolutely. Feels like a really good place to end that. But that's been a really fascinating chat. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you for joining me today.
Thank you. It was great being here.
Wonderful. And that's been Trade Talk TV, and we will see you next time.